just when you think there's going to be nothing new to talk about in Formula One, we get a major announcement from the FIA detailing new measures it's going to be taking to try and safeguard the future of Formula One and its teams. I'm Glenn Freeman, and I've found myself a nice comfortable sofa to sit on, but I don't have any guests with me today. Ed Straw and Scott Mitchell are joining me on the line from an acceptable social distance, certainly. Ed and Scott, welcome along. Now, Scott, lots of little details here been announced by the FIA. What have we heard and what's different? What have they changed to make sure they try and safeguard the teams as much as possible?
Yeah, it is quite an extraordinary situation we find ourselves in globally, so it's not surprising that we've got some quite extraordinary action being taken. I've got the FIA statement, quite a significant and detailed press release here, just because it isn't the work of a moment where making your way through it, but it's this combination of special power granted to the FIA to make sure that they can save the F1 season, but also, as you said, safeguard Formula One in the medium to long term as well. And it's very interesting because the sort of primary focus has been on the 2020 sporting regulations, and this has been a series of changes. The idea being, the word that they've used is sort of increased flexibility, so that when it comes to reorganising the calendar, when it comes to rejigging the race format, or rather the race weekend format, if they need to, they can do all this. So now instead of unanimity across all of the stakeholders, they now only need 60% support amongst the teams for certain areas. This includes race weekend format. So, for example, if we were going to get away with Friday practice or tweak the way weekends work, so switch to a 2-day event to help a compressed calendar make a bit more sense later in the year, that would be more doable. If they wanted to extend the shutdown, which has already gone up to 3 weeks and been moved forward from August, they can do that as well. There's also lots of little details like changing how the power unit components are going to be restricted going forward if we have 14 or fewer races, or 11 or fewer races. And there's also a little change to testing. There was going to be an option for the 3-day post-season test in Abu Dhabi, and now that's an optional 1-day test for young drivers. So, and then on top of all of this, you have the quite big change of banning aerodynamic development for the new rules. They've been pushed back to 2022, but instead of being able to work on them and have a bit more time to work on them, now the teams basically can't do anything with those rules for 2020. So, yeah, a raft of changes, some bigger than others, but it all adds up to the FIA doing what it thinks it needs to do to safeguard the sport.
Now, Ed, I think it's fair to say that F1 was ripe for criticism with the way it handled the Australian Grand Prix being cancelled at the last minute. But this is decisive action from the FIA now, and very significant action. What does it tell us when the governing body is moving to the point of giving itself effectively emergency powers?
Well, it tells you this is an emergency, doesn't it? What F1's having to do at the moment is kind of economically retrench, try and avoid excess spending, keep that expenditure under control. The idea being that the teams, F1, everything comes out the other side in a good economic situation. So it's logical that the FIA needs to have a certain amount of autonomy, although it's 60% they need in order to actually get this through. So they still need a majority, but they don't need that unanimity. So this stops the teams politicking and bickering if something sensitive comes up. So it's a sensible move from the FIA, and it tells us that this is proactive measures to kind of get ahead of the worst of the economic impact, because we want to have a healthy Formula One coming out the other side of this.
And it's not all just about cost saving and safeguarding the future of the teams and their resources and financial means. We've had an interest in technical change as well. We know that the new rules have been pushed back from 2021 to 2022, so we've got cars being carried over from this year into next year. But one piece that can't be carried over is the Mercedes DAS innovation, the dual-axis steering. We were unsure if that would be allowed to be carried over with the cars from this year, but now we know for certain it's banned, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a logical move. As you said, it wasn't in the current regulations, but this is one of the few modifications they've made to the technical regulations. They've republished effectively the 2020 regulations as 21, but with these little tweaks. Basically, what they've done is they've taken the clause from Article 10.4, which is the technical regulations covering the steering, and they've taken the paragraph that went into the original 21 regulations and just transplanted it into the new 21 regulations. So they've effectively brought it forward. A logical move because it will stop other teams having to develop this system. Obviously, some of the top teams in particular will be thinking about whether they want to try and incorporate it in their 2020 car, but it keeps that originally planned timescale that it would be outlawed for next year. It wasn't a foregone conclusion when they just agreed to carry over the rules. Now it's signed, sealed, no DAS in 2021.
Interesting conundrum there, because the teams potentially have the time on their hands with no racing going on at the moment to develop it, but they might not have many races in 2020 to use it. Now, Scott, talking about what the teams are up to, you mentioned the factory shutdown and how long it's going to be and that it's taking place at the moment. We know that now includes engine manufacturers, which it hasn't in the past. What else is going on there, and how do you think that could actually impact what goes on when we get back to racing?
Well, at the very least, it means that whatever battle we were expecting in 2020 is on hiatus at the moment. It's going to be a different battle to what we were expecting when it does get going. And it's going to influence what we see in 21 at the very least. So it's quite a confusing time. At the moment, all 10 teams and the 4 engine manufacturers are observing some kind of weird hybrid of either lockdown based on government restrictions because of the health crisis, or they're into their shutdown periods. So the way it would normally work is basically all the teams have to down tools for 2 weeks in August, but that's been extended to 21 days and it has to be served by the end of April. Now, some teams have started that process already. Some teams were due to start it at the beginning of April. And basically what that means is no development work, no design work, no wind tunnel time. So it really does put a big pause on the season. And the idea is this was the fairest way to work because several companies can't go and do their day-to-day business anyway. So it would have been unfair if 2 or 3 of the teams, for example, AlphaTauri and Ferrari in Italy, were shut down because of government restrictions, but the UK teams might be able to find ways to work around it. The teams have all agreed that the fairest way forward is to have this basically an indefinite shutdown. So it's extended to 3 weeks. It's a week longer than it would normally be, as well as obviously not being in August. But it could be extended further. The engine manufacturers have been drafted into it now, so they can't do R&D work on the current power units or future power units. What they can do, because we know that seven of the teams in the UK and their engine divisions are trying to help out as much as possible where possible with the coronavirus pandemic. If you're doing a non-F1 project, you're allowed to keep the relevant part of the factory open. So, for example, we know that the Mercedes engineers at Brixworth, they've been involved in helping the effort in the UK. If they're doing anything, whether it's development work or working with other engineers in universities or hospitals, they're free to carry on doing that. But apart from that, it's basically blanket pause on all activities, which obviously hikes up the pressure to get down to business when the purse strings are going to be a little bit tighter whenever the restrictions are lifted.
And the teams will have a sense of relief that this has all been agreed. Because if you remember, when the 2021 regulations were originally announced, Ross Brawn said it was important to save the teams from themselves. Well, I think, although there's some bickering over that, in this situation, the teams also know they have to save themselves from themselves almost by making sure things are shut down. That takes off the table the temptation to try and steal a march on your rivals by putting in extra development work. The more they can kind of pause all activities, the less the economic impact is. So that's why the teams will be happy with this, and this kind of holding pattern can be sustained for as long as is necessary to actually get F1 back up and running, hopefully in a healthy state.
Yeah, good to know that in times of a global crisis, even Formula One teams can get on the same page. Thanks very much, Ed and Scott. Viewers, we'd love to hear from you, so let us know what you think of the measures the FIA has taken. Make sure you like this video, make sure you subscribe to the channel. We're going to keep working flat out through this break where there's no racing going on, so there'll be plenty more to come from the race. Make sure you stay at home, make sure you stay safe, and we'll see you very soon.